All right. I think we can get started. Cool. Hi, everybody. Um, Thank you for being here. Thank you for coming. My name is Wandy Pascual. I am a program manager here at the Boston Society for Architecture, and it really is a great pleasure to welcome you all to the space, both in person and virtually. I'll provide a quick overview of our agenda as well, and so thank you, Miranda. We are glad that folks are already able to grab some food and get settled in. So that was the first section of today. This is the part of our welcoming remarks, so we're right on track. So afterwards, our partners from CHAPA, thank you for being here. We'll provide some insight into what the MBTA Communities Act is and also share a few materials from their work over the years. My colleague, Miranda Diolio, who's also here, will share some information on how architects and designers can get involved in ongoing efforts related to the Act. We'll end this first section of the evening, which is being live streamed, with a Q&A towards the end of the live stream. And then shortly after, we'll say goodbye to the folks who are online and transition to the conversation and roundtable, which will essentially be small group discussions with the folks at your table currently. Here, you'll have the chance to meet each other, talk to each other about what you just heard, and then after a quick break, we'll actually begin the part of the workshop where each participant will take down and write testimonials that can be shared in an upcoming town meeting or future town meeting. This will be the last portion of today's event, and then we'll close out shortly after. So, thank you. So as I mentioned, my name is Wandy Pascual. I'm here with the Boston Society for Architecture. And to those who do not know about the BSA's mission is to improve the quality of life for Boston area residents and the region, Eastern Massachusetts residents as well, by championing innovation in the built environment. So we deliver on our mission through two connected streams of work. The first really being enabling architects to excel in their profession by offering education and networking opportunities and advocating for the profession at a local and then also regional level. And then the second stream is catalyzing and collaborating on innovation initiatives aimed at addressing equity and sustainability challenges in the built environment, including, of course, housing. So we are delighted to partner with CHAPA on today's event, which is the first of its kind here at the BSA. And we're really honored to have a leader in these efforts here with us to collaborate on this. So I'll turn it over to y'all.
Thank you. Let's see if standing here is all right. I will move over in a second. So thank you all for being here. My name is Lily Link. This is Will Radigan. He can introduce himself in a moment. I just wanted to tell you a little bit about CHAPA and our program before we launch into our presentation. So CHAPA is a nonprofit whose mission is to encourage the production and preservation of housing that is affordable to both low and moderate income families. We've been around for almost 60 years, advocating for affordable housing across the state. And when it comes to Section 3A, we have been, or the MBTA Communities Law, as it is also called, we have been running a technical assistance program for MBTA communities since January of 2023, with a specific focus on their community engagement efforts. At this point, we've worked in close to 70 communities through a cohort model, which has given us the opportunity to really get a bird's eye view of what's happening across the region and to share that information with you. So if we want to get started, will kick us off.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Lily, and great to be here with all of you. I'm Will Radigan. I am CHAPA's brand new MBTA Communities Engagement Manager, and Lily has let me give the presentation today for the first time, so happy to be here and doing it. So I want to give a little background first before we get into what this law is, about why we have it and why it's something that we think, as an affordable housing nonprofit, is something that's absolutely crucial to the future of Massachusetts. And really, the motivation behind this law and why it was created is that Massachusetts has a tremendous housing shortage that is causing problems really in every sector of the state. And the reason for that housing shortage, among many others, but probably the most important reason, is zoning. Massachusetts is 80% of the greater Boston area is now zoned exclusively for single-family homes. Meaning that it is illegal to build anything other than a detached single-family home, no apartment buildings, no townhouses, no mid-rise, etc. and that's artificially limiting the supply of housing. And while that might seem kind of like a morally neutral thing, kind of arbitrary, it's really rooted in a pretty, you could say, dark history. Housing discrimination had long been an issue in Massachusetts, but when the Fair Housing Act passed in 1968, it became illegal to explicitly discriminate in housing based on race. And so a way that a lot of communities around Massachusetts reacted to this was by using exclusionary single-family zoning as a way to keep people with lower incomes, who disproportionately were people of color, out of their communities. And so as a result, we saw quite a bit of multifamily housing production in the 60s and 70s, but after the Fair Housing Act passed, we had this movement called the Great Down Zone, which Amy talks about in her excellent report that she'll tell you about later, called Exclusionary by Design, where communities all across Massachusetts downzoned to allowing only single-family housing in most of their land, which led to the production of multifamily housing falling off a cliff. And you can see that in the 90s, 2000s, 2010s, we saw very little multifamily housing get built. So the extremely high housing prices we're seeing today are really as a result of those zoning policies that came about in the 70s, 80s, and 90s kind of coming to a head. And just to give a scale of the problem, what we estimate now is that Massachusetts needs 200,000 new homes by 2030 to meet the demand we have in this state, which is a huge number. And the MBTA Communities Act is really one of our first major steps towards meeting that demand. So why the MBTA Communities Act? First thing, high housing prices are really bad for many reasons. A healthy economy requires housing of all types, not just single family homes. We need apartments, we need affordable housing, we need more affordable housing options. And those high home prices are having really serious consequences. Recent college graduates are getting pushed out of the state. People that are elderly and need to downsize can't find those options, are often getting displaced to other states as well. People that may have gone through a recent divorce are unable to find an apartment to live in the same community where their family is living. And we're even seeing people displaced and pushed into homelessness because of this issue. So really, really serious problem. MBTA Communities Act is aiming to address that by trying to make a first step at dismantling the exclusionary zoning that is pushing housing prices so high. And the way it's doing it is focusing on building more housing near transit stations, because that is a way in which we can increase density while reducing traffic and reducing greenhouse gas emissions in the process. Another dimension of this law is that it's coming from the state because municipalities have not solved it. Oh, I'm sorry. Can you all hear me? Okay. Municipalities have shown a real unwillingness to solve this on their own. They've had decades on decades to zone for more housing, and they have not done so. So the state is stepping in to say that we need every community in Greater Boston to do their part in providing more housing for people in the state. And a little background on the law: it was passed in 2020 by the state legislature as part of a broader economic development bill, and it passed almost unanimously through a Democratic legislature and signed by Republican Charlie Baker. So at the state level, it truly is a bipartisan and very popular bill that was passed. So now, what does this law actually do? So what it does is it requires every community that is served by the MBTA or adjacent to a community that's served by the MBTA to create a district of reasonable size where multifamily housing is allowed by right, meaning without going through a special permit process that can be a really onerous, long, expensive process for developers that makes the development of multifamily housing really difficult. It impacts 177 communities, and there are 4 categories that have different deadlines for compliance with this law. Last year, we saw all of the rapid transit communities go through this process. This year, we have a ton of communities going through it, both commuter rail communities and communities that are adjacent to commuter rail served communities. And then next year, a few of the smaller towns go through this process as well. A bit more about the requirements. It requires 15 units per acre by right, which I'll go into what that looks like in practice, but it's kind of a gentle density. It's not huge high rises. The zone has to be of reasonable size, which is defined differently in every town based on a bunch of characteristics. And a certain percentage of this zoning district must be within a half mile of the transit station if there is a transit station in the community. Going to a bit more, you can't place the district on excluded land, so land that has conservation restrictions or wetlands where it would not be feasible or legal to build housing. You can't put age restrictions on it, so you can't make it only for seniors. It has to be suitable for families, which means you can't have a cap on the number of bedrooms. You can't, for example, say you can only build 2-bedroom apartments because that wouldn't be suitable for people with multiple children. A developer can still choose to build that, but the town can't require that of them. You can require up to 10% of units to be affordable, and if the town undergoes an economic feasibility analysis, they can require up to 20% to be affordable if that is not going to be a barrier to development, as it sometimes can be. And finally, there is an option to have some mandatory mixed use, so requiring commercial development along with residential, and that can only account for 25% of the new zoning capacity in the community. And that's because often there isn't as much demand for commercial development. So if you require mixed use everywhere, that could reduce the amount of housing that actually gets built. So what does this actually look like in process? What this law is really targeting is mixing middle housing. Because right now in Massachusetts, we have a fair amount of mid-rise, high-rise housing in downtown Boston. We have tons of single-family housing out in the suburbs. But what we really don't have is all of these kind of housing types in between. Duplexes, fourplexes, traditional triple-deckers, townhouses, multiplexes. We have a lot of triple-deckers maybe in Somerville, Cambridge, Boston right now, but actually that kind of housing wouldn't be legal to build today based on the current zoning. So we're trying to re-legalize some of these popular historic housing types in New England. And one of the reasons for this is that these kind of homes can really function as starter homes that are naturally more affordable for people. Single-family homes put one unit on a big piece of land that's by necessity going to be very expensive. If you can put multiple units on the same piece of land, even if it's not deed restricted as affordable, it tends to be lower price for the average person. So we're really thinking about creating starter homes for people buying their first homes, perhaps, workforce housing for teachers, firefighters, public servants, et cetera, who don't qualify for subsidized housing but can't afford the really expensive housing stock we have today. And we are deep into this process right now, so I want to give you an update on where we're at. So 177 communities are required to comply. As of today, 82 have. 36 communities have received final approval from the state, and so far of the 82 that have approved their multifamily zoning districts, none of them have been rejected by the state. So most towns that are trying to comply are doing a good job of actually complying with the law. As of today, also, unfortunately, 17 communities have voted it down, but there are still 60 communities or so that have votes coming up this fall, which is one of the reasons we're here today, which is to encourage you to get involved and help us get those communities over the finish line. Looks pretty good. 82% passage rate so far. Plug for our technical assistance program. Shout out to Lily. We have a 92% passage rate so far, so we have been making some impact, we like to think. But it's not over yet. We're really kind of in the final sprint of this second phase right now, and that's why we're here talking to you, because we need the help of advocates to get this done. So now I'll turn it over to Lily to chat a bit more about how you can get involved.
Thanks, Will. I'll try to stand where you are. So Will sort of set the table for us about how we got to where we are today, and now we're going to talk about where we go next. So for those unfortunate 17 communities that have not chosen to comply yet, the number one reason people are making that choice is because of the Milton lawsuit. For anyone who hasn't been following, Milton was part of that first set of 12 rapid transit communities. They did pass a district through their representative town meeting in December of 2023. Unfortunately, there was a referendum the following February that overturned the law. The Attorney General responded by filing a lawsuit, and then Milton filed a counter lawsuit. So that is where we find ourselves today. The hearing for these cases, I guess technically, was just 2 weeks ago on October 7th. And now we have to wait and see what the SJC, the Supreme Judicial Court, decides. So unfortunately, some towns are sort of taking that as an invitation to delay. The reality is that for those towns that have a deadline of the end of this year, is they will be non-compliant if they wait for that case to be resolved. Even if we were to get a response from the SJC tomorrow, the process that it takes to schedule a town meeting, open the warrant, get stuff on the warrant, close it, is too long, really. There's not enough runway for that at this point. So those communities are essentially committing to be non-compliant and just kind of rolling the dice and see how it goes. One thing we totally didn't mention is the consequences for noncompliance, which is that in addition to potentially getting sued by the Attorney General, communities lose access to over 17 different grant programs. And now that there's actually the new ones, we're close to 20 grant programs. So this is hundreds of millions of dollars that communities will lose access to, really vital programs like MassWorks, Housing Choice, Housing Works, and now there's a brand new one called the Community Catalyst Fund that is funding specifically for communities that have passed 3A. So it's not just an existing grant program that non-compliant communities lose access to, it's actually a brand new grant program just for communities that have adopted this law. So, setting that aside, a lot of folks have asked, well, what's gonna happen with the Milton case? And there's sort of a few potential outcomes. So the Attorney General's arguments is that all communities shall comply with the law. It does say shall in the statute itself, and that she has a right to enforce that law and any penalties for not complying with the law beyond just the loss of state grant funding. Milton's arguments is that the HLC guidelines should have been released as regulations. So not to get too into the nitty gritty, but the statute itself of Section 3A it's like 3 paragraphs. And within the statute, they give the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities the power to write the guidelines that will then determine how the law actually gets implemented. They could have chosen to do it as regulations, which is a more kind of drawn out, complicated process. They did not choose to do that, for better or worse. They were released as guidelines, and so Milton's pushing back against that. And they're also saying that the loss of that grant funding is the punishment and that the AG can't sue them on top of that. So what could potentially change depending on how the SJC rules? If the AG gets everything that she wants, the law stays as it is, really nothing changes. And potentially the state could even have the power to appoint a special master to rezone towns like Milton that do not comply. Alternatively, it is possible that the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities could have to go back to the table or the drawing board and re-release them as regulations instead of guidelines. The law wouldn't go away, but it would definitely delay implementation. I think we'd see a lot more communities waiting to see how that goes and waiting to see if their requirements change under the new guidelines now regulations. What definitely won't happen is the law will not be overturned. And that's the biggest piece of misinformation we've seen, is that folks think that if the SJC rules in Milton's favor, that the law poofs and disappears overnight. That is not true. The worst case scenario is essentially that the penalty for noncompliance becomes just the state grant funding, which is, as one of the SJC judges said, he said that would be a twig, not a stick. And we agree. So we're hoping that is not the outcome. And this is one of the reasons that we so need more folks showing up to town meeting, to planning board hearings, and really any opportunity for public comment to express their support for Section 3A and explain why it's so important to comply. So tonight we're gonna get to practice, I think one of the most important skill sets of that, which is making a public comment. But there are a lot of different ways that you can make your voice heard in this process. So there are coalitions all over the region. In fact, we've seen a lot of brand new coalitions pop up sort of in direct response to 3A in places like Norwood, Ipswich, Marblehead, Southborough. A lot of different communities are starting coalitions really just in response to this, which is very exciting. So if there is an existing coalition in your community, I strongly urge you to connect with them. They are likely already involved in this. If there is not, reach out to me and we can help you start one, because that's a lot of what CHAPA does. Attending meetings as early and often as you can. For communities with a deadline of the end of this year, the map's probably already been decided, the bylaw's probably already been written, it's probably already on the warrant. So The opportunity to influence what that map and bylaw looks like, unfortunately, has closed, but the opportunity to make sure it gets passed is still very much open. So it is likely a lot of communities that have a deadline of the end of this year are currently holding public hearings with their planning board or select board to determine whether or not they will recommend it. And so now is a great time to start going to meetings. Writing op-eds and letters to the editor. I know that there's a real dearth of local papers these days, which is it's a big loss. But for communities that do have local papers, we found that that's a really effective way of communicating and getting our message out there to people. So definitely taking advantage of that where it exists. Starting postcard and social media campaigns. We've created a lot of materials at CHAPA that we can and will share with you all to be able to do that. We even have social media graphics that you can just copy and paste. You don't have to make anything yourself. And some of our coalitions, like the Marblehead Housing Coalition, for example, is utilizing a postcard campaign to get people to pledge to vote yes. Talking with local officials, talking directly with whatever your form of government. It might be a mayor and city council, it might be town meeting members if you have representative town meeting, or if you live in a community with open town meeting, it's technically anybody. So speaking directly one-on-one with folks, I think one of the biggest things I've learned from the past 2 years of seeing this law be implemented is just what a difference one-on-one conversations really make. I've had the experience of talking to someone who came into the conversation just furious and rearing to go, and by taking that time to kind of parse through their concerns, answer their questions, demonstrate my genuine interest in trying to understand their perspective. I've seen a lot of people go from this is the worst thing I've ever heard in my entire life and I'm gonna spend every second that I can to defeat it, to well, I don't like it, but I guess it's not that bad, which for me is as good as good as it gets. You're never gonna get someone from hating it to loving it, but if you can get them from hating it to being neutral, or from being neutral to loving it, we're just trying to nudge people a little further along on the spectrum. And when you have a face-to-face conversation with someone you trust and who you think is reasonable, people are so much more open to changing their minds than something that they read on Facebook. It's my other piece of advice. Just don't go on Facebook. Just don't. You're not gonna convince anyone of anything there. And then lastly, vote. Obviously, if you can't do any of these things to convince other people to vote yes, you can vote yes. So we have all of this information on the tables, so you'll be able to reference it as you're working on your statements. But just talking through a few of our tips for making an effective public comment. Obviously, you have to introduce yourself. In a lot of places, you're required to give your name and address, or at the very least, your street name. If you don't feel comfortable giving your exact address, I often find people are okay with you just giving your street name. They just want to know that you actually do live in town. And share something about yourself. Try to help people, what is the context in which you're coming into this conversation? Are you a homeowner, a renter? Did you grow up there? Are you a business owner? Help folks understand what's the perspective or the context you're coming from. Do you have kids in the school system? Sharing your story, the more personal it is, the better. The more folks can connect to it rather than just a list of facts and figures. But keeping it brief, again, we only have 2 minutes, which is why this is a skill we're gonna practice. But really getting to why is this important to you as a resident? How has the housing shortage impacted your life? And obviously, stating your support, making it very clear where you stand. Naming 2 to 3 community benefits. So you start sort of talking about how does this impact me? Why do I care? And then bringing it to, okay, why does this matter for the broader community? So there are a lot of points you could raise. We want you to pick ones that are gonna be relevant for you, but some examples are lowering housing costs by increasing the supply of missing middle housing, providing more housing options for older adults looking to downsize, young couples, teachers, small business owners, improving the sustainability of our communities by building multifamily housing near transit and local businesses, trying to encourage folks to get out of their cars, walk, bike, and take transit more often. I know in a lot of communities it's not reasonable to ask someone to live car-free, but there are a lot of places where people could maybe stop driving 3 blocks to the coffee shop, and that is the kind of behavior that we're really trying to shift. And then restating your support. So hammer it home with a crystal clear where you stand. So we have a couple examples, and then we have a couple of short videos. So one example could be, hi, my name is Sarah, and I live on Maple Avenue with my husband and 2 children. Introducing yourself. I've lived in town for 10 years, and 2 years ago, we were able to purchase our first home in town. Finding an affordable home was incredibly difficult, even with good salaries. So that's sort of placing her personal context. I'm here to share my support for passing the MBTA Community Zoning District's proposal, which would allow for and encourage new multifamily homes in town. Stating support. Moving into the community benefits, talking about diversifying housing options in town, including small townhomes, 2 and 3 family homes to alleviate stress on the housing market. Some other examples, and then closing, restating the support. Again, this example following a similar structure, introducing himself, placing his kind of context within the town, being a renter, loving the community, but feeling like there's not enough young people because of the housing options, stating their support, talking about some of the community benefits. So I'm not going to read all these aloud to you because I feel like that would be boring, but just to kind of show you how that structure takes form. And then we are going to play some quick videos. How do I actually press?
At the heart of this issue is whether we think people who don't live in single-family homes deserve to live in our town. Does the elderly couple who needs to downsize? Does the single mom who's a waitress at Jamie's? Do the teachers, their assistants who teach our kids? Does the janitor that's gonna clean up here after we're done, do they deserve to live in our town? We're in a well-documented statewide housing crisis, and a strong community requires a variety of contributors, so we all have the services we need. And in North Andover, we take care of our neighbors. And making sure that they have somewhere to live is an important way to do that. People should vote yes.
So this is a series of videos made by MHP, Katie Lacey in the back, where they gathered excellent examples of public comments from 3A votes that took place in the spring. So I'm just going to share a few of them. I want to focus on the content.
I live in an apartment. I have sat through a number of planning board meetings where I've listened to homeowners in Easton explain that apartments lower the quality of life in this town. In one meeting, an Easton resident told the audience that apartments don't count as homes, they're just places to live. I once had to console my child when she came home from elementary school crying because classmates told her she was going to grow up to be a criminal solely because she lived in an apartment.
Just for the sake of time, I'm going to focus on the comments themselves. This is the last one.
When I think about the MBTA Communities Law, I think about it like this. First, money. More development, especially around our commerce centers, means more foot traffic to the shops, ice cream parlors, restaurants, mechanics, etc., that make our town so great. I've seen plenty of people on Facebook reminisce about the movie theater and delicatessens this town used to be able to support. Put simply, our village centers thrive with more people, and people will thrive spending more time in our village centers.
Great. So yeah, I think, those videos demonstrate different approaches that people took, whether it's making the economic argument, sharing the personal story about what it's like being a renter in a town that discriminates against renters, or the first gentleman who talked about, do people who live in multifamily homes, do people who live in apartments deserve to live in our town? Do we want to be the kind of place that thinks that those people don't deserve to live here? So I think all of those are excellent examples, and there are more that I know MHP is continuing to post online every day, so I encourage you to follow along with those on social media. And I think now I'm going to hand it back over so we can transition into our group discussions and writing our own comments.
Thank you so much. I'll pass this over to you. Huge appreciation to you both for doing such an amazing job of breaking down what 3A is, the impact that it has, and how you can properly advocate in your municipal towns, cities, etc. I am now going to break down a little bit of what role you can play as an architect. You're probably asking yourself, I just learned all of this, I'm hearing all about these resources, but what's the impact I can make as an advocate? And so before I do that, many of you probably don't know who I am. I started at BSA this past April. My name is Miranda DiOlio, and I'm the program manager of policy and advocacy here. And I'm super excited to be here with you all and really challenge you all to no longer look at yourself as just architects, but to look at yourself as advocates. So something really important, and I'm gonna read it because it's like my favorite sentence to say. I said it at the Embodied Carbon Summit, and I will say it at every, any policy and advocacy or event that I'll have, is the AAC community plays an essential role in advocacy. Your expertise as an architect translate to an educated advocate as a resident. And that is very, very important for you to understand of what your expertise can influence in the municipal, local, state level. So here at BSA, with the wonderful team that I have, we have put together this how-to guide, Architects and City Policy. And it really does break down a lot of the information that was just shared from what is 3A, what are its impacts, and how can you get involved properly. And so within this, you'll see that there's very key principles on, as an architect, how you can play an impactful role. And we call them out and we say the proper advocacy channels, avenues, ways to connect with your local officials, ways to write letters to the editor, connecting with coalitions, etc. So I want to kind of call these key points that we just are here on the page. And so first, really being, what is the expertise you can offer and how? And so whether that's a visualization skills, thoughtful design and site planning, knowledge of sustainable design practices, creating solutions for adaptive reuse, distilling complex zoning requirements and building codes, and thoughtful community engagement strategies. This is something you all deal with every day in your careers and your expertise. And this is something your municipal officials and local residents may not know the way that you can. So you're able to distill this information at a level that makes sense to you and to your local communities and your residents. And so this is very key when you're giving your testimony, when you're writing your comments. She was talking about the personal experience means a lot, and as an architect and as a resident in your community, that will be an essential role that you can play. And so in that how-to guide, it's both online in the website. You should have gotten it in your know before you go email, QR codes. There's printed versions on your table. So please take a look. This is something that will live on past this, whether your town has passed, hasn't passed, will continue to be implemented moving forward that you can use, as well as if there's something not in there, we want to hear from you. What is it that we can build out to support you in this process? Because this is the first of its kind, and we want to continue doing that. And this is what we're here to do for all of you. So please don't hesitate to reach out to myself, Wandy, my team, and we can continue to do this work together. And it's really exciting to see you all here. So just a huge thank you, because the first step of becoming an advocate is being engaged, and this is what you're all doing right now. So that's really amazing. That's really all I wanted to touch on. We can go to the next slide. This kind of breaks down what's more in there. This is a page that you will see in every how-to guide, because this is kind of the clear pathway on how to testify, where you can find your information, as well as if you want to sit on your planning board, how can I help you do that? Because you can do that, and that's super exciting. So don't limit yourself to what you can do in your profession. But yeah, I'm now going to open it up to Q&A. That was a lot of information you were just handed. I will be walking around. Lily and Will, if you want to come back here, as well as any questions on the live stream. Please, feel free.
All right, so our first question is there an additional benefit of more taxpayers in town, increasing the ability of towns to pay for schools, infrastructure, et cetera, rather than relying on overrides?
Yes. And that is one of the many community benefits you could speak to in a public comment. I mean, I think it's interesting to me because there are a lot of folks out there that seem to assume that new residents are going to absorb the costs of those new residents. But it is important to remember, and I think anyone who works in development or who's an architect probably understands the basic math that if you have one single family home on a parcel of land, you are going to be able to generate less tax revenue than if you have 3, 4, or 6 units on that same parcel of land. It's a more efficient use of municipal land, a more efficient use of municipal resources, and generates tax revenue for the town. And there have been examples of, in places like Norwood or Reading, redevelopment that they have done there. There was one example in Norwood. There was like an industrial building that was generating about $80,000 in tax revenue for the town annually, and when they turned it into a small apartment building, it was generating almost $1 million for the town in tax revenue annually. So obviously it depends on are you going from an undeveloped parcel to a large apartment building? Is it going from a 2-family to a 4-family? Depending on the scale of the development we're talking about, obviously that revenue is going to differ, but across the board, it is a financially net positive thing to create more housing.
Hi, so my name is Natasha Spada. I'm the chair of the Needham Planning Board. We just passed MBTA Communities 2 days ago.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And the good plan, too, the neighborhood housing plan.
Right, so we had a basic plan and a neighborhood housing plan. I've been working on it for 4 years. We have, regarding revenue, it's about 2.6 million of revenue for basically, as you know, we were given a certain amount of units that we had to meet. And so we had a neighborhood plan because our current zoning meets it somewhat with some tweaks, but it doesn't generate any housing. And so we had a neighborhood plan that would add 3,300. And then out of that, what is really viable, because some of those lots are already built on, right? But one of the biggest challenges that we had was from the FinCom, from the Financial Committee. And that was regarding capacity in our schools. So one of the things that we did is we researched, and I believe, so CPA funds, all of those would be negated. Like we wouldn't be getting any funds from the state if we didn't comply. And then also, I think MSBA, and we need schools. So that's a huge one to tell everyone. But still, the Financial Committee didn't believe us about the 2.5, and they actually did not support the neighborhood plan. And we passed 118 to 90, and we're hoping that no one goes in the next 20 days and challenges the charter. So we had to be very careful how we're working with the town manager. We have a town meeting, working with the town manager to understand how we put these the zoning articles out so that they would be able to be adopted. So it's complicated, but we had just, in general, we had RKG was our consultant who worked with the fiscal impact analysis for it. And so I guess I just want to let you know we passed it. We had a lot of naysayers. Oscar Mertz, who used to be at Elkus Manfredi, had a coalition in our town. He would be a great person to talk to if you're looking to create a coalition. He's awesome, and he has so much information. So that's one thing. The other part is I highly recommend, if you all care about advocacy, to sit on a board of your town. I'm the only architect, I'm the only woman, and I'm the only minority. And that was the same for the Permanent Public Building Committee. When they asked me to run for the planning board, I did. And I asked Lynn from Canon, I can't remember her last name right this second, a good friend of mine. Is that right? Lynn Denninger to run for PPBC so that we would still have a woman and an architect. But it's not that big of a deal. You have so much more experience than anyone there. I highly recommend, and I know that Judy Nitch and others are like trying to get people to run for these positions because we need to represent our towns. So It's not scary. You can do it. You will have more knowledge than anyone else there, believe it or not. And it's so important to have a voice. And so we had a great turnout, and hopefully it'll continue, and hopefully we can create housing. So now the parts that we couldn't do through MBTA communities, I'm going to tackle them because I'm chair until May. So I'm going to start looking at the other neighborhoods that were not part of this, that we can look at it with those neighbors specifically. Community input was the biggest issue. So we're not done. We're just starting, and hopefully this will start changing it. So, I mean, the average house is $1.4 million. People that grow up there can't live there. Workforce can't live there. We created workforce training, workforce housing incentives. We also have 12.7% affordability. So we're trying, but it's hard to move a barge, but we're doing it little by little.
I feel like you deserve a round of applause for that because I know how much work went into that. Yes, and the Needham Housing Coalition is amazing. Sade Ratliff, who's works for CHAPA, has been working with them, I think, this whole year pretty much, and they're fantastic.
My name is Malav Mehta. I just had a question about, you were talking about your experience engaging people who are sort of on the other side of the spectrum. And what is the strategy there to engage that and have a productive conversation without it just devolving into some ideological face-off?
Ain't that the question of the century? So I'll share my theory, and I'm curious for Will's theory as well. So I think about this on like the idea of the 1 to 5 scale. So people like myself who are like all in pro-housing, I would be a 1, and people who say crazy things like the governor is gonna build an 80-story high-rise public housing tower here and shove illegal migrants into it, like that's the 5. That's the person who is so far gone, you can skip them. I'm focused on bringing the 3s and the 2s to become 1s, and the 4s and the 3s to become 2. I'm just looking to nudge people 1 or 2 spots over on the spectrum. And so part of it is understanding, like, when is someone just not arguing in good faith and is just trying to be antagonistic, in which case it's a matter of, you know, I think about I go and present at a lot of community meetings, and sometimes I get very antagonistic people who act like they want to ask a question, but really they just want to have an argument. And in that case, when it becomes clear that they're not actually looking to learn or have a conversation, I really just focus on trying to wrap things up in as respectful of a way as I can and focus on someone who is willing to learn. But there's a surprising number of people that are somewhere in that middle where they have, oftentimes they've just been given bad information. Someone told them that it's going to destroy the school system, or that it's going to depress their home values, or that it's going to create so much more traffic, and they're coming with a genuine concern, and they're like willing to talk. And so one of my methods is just asking questions and really trying to understand, like, what's at the core of this, and get down to, like, what are your actual values? Like, what do you love about this community? What are you afraid to lose in this community? And oftentimes I find that, like, the more I drill down to that, like, core nugget, that there's a lot more similarity there than it might appear. And so I could go on and on about this. This is like how we change people's minds is basically my obsession and what I think about all day, every day. It's like why I do this job. I could do a whole thing about like the cognitive science of like politics, but I won't. If you want to talk about that, come talk to me, because I love talking about it. But yeah, I'll leave it there. Basically, be discerning. Is this someone who's genuinely willing to learn? And if so, focusing on asking questions to understand where they're coming from before you dive into monologuing about why they should change their mind. So coming from curiosity.
Yeah, I agree with everything Lily said. Only thing I would add in this particular case is I think this issue is really unique in that almost everyone has something to gain from creating more housing options in their community. So before you get into the argument, really have that conversation, figure out what this person cares about, what they want, because there's probably something in this for them. Unless someone wants to live, you know, in the forest by themselves without any businesses, without any services, without needing anyone else's help, they need housing for other people to exist. And so if you can figure out what they care about and what they want, there's usually a case to be made or some common ground to be found. I really think this is like a win-win-win issue in reality, and most people just don't understand that, and so you can get them to that point.
And I've had the dubious pleasure of watching lots and lots of town meetings. And to your question, I think that the town meeting format is really tough. Because in terms of like convincing, explaining, don't. Just be as appealing and positive as you can in as short a time. Getting some younger people at town and city meetings is like critical. I mean, I'm old, so I can say this. There's just, I see, they've got the cameras, it's just a sea of white hair. It's really a problem. I've got kids, grandkids, they just are, it's just such a painful process to get involved with. But say something, I think the map you laid out was wonderful. The people that have really like put a spear in it are these people who just get up and go like, well, I think it's a great idea. And everyone just stops. And then because you're going to get all these people explaining why it shouldn't. I think that, I guess I'll just stop. But I think explaining or persuading it in that format, not so much. There is something coming up that I've noticed recently that people have been, and this is part of our national issue, people do get up sometimes and just lie. The Roy Cohn syndrome is spreading. And I do think it's okay to say, that's not true, but just stop after that. So keep it, say you said it, and sit down. People will love you. The shorter what you talk, they'll love you more. Yes.
It's true. One of my favorite, I went to Andover's town meeting in the spring, and I would say my favorite comment of the night was this guy who got up and was like, look, my son is in college, and if he wants to move back to Andover, there's only one place he's going to be able to move, and I love my basement. So please pass 3A so I can keep my basement. And that was it. And that was the whole, it was like 15 seconds from beginning to end. It got a big laugh. It kind of lightened the mood. Like, I do think in general, keeping it positive, like people want to be on the winning team. And if you have a bunch, the Needham Housing Coalition showing up with their signs and their enthusiasm, and you look at like, wow, those people look like they're having fun and they like each other and they seem excited about this, and those people are just like screaming and look all red-faced and angry. It's like you want to go with the winning team. So sometimes it is just vibes.
Educated and learn all the pieces that people are concerned about. Most of them, 90% of them are about money and about traffic. So getting a good traffic study, having understanding the fiscal impact of it. Are your schools about to burst and they don't, people don't want to bring people in unless there's money to fix the schools. Things like that is what people care about because they're concerned about their property value because they've invested a lot in their homes and they're concerned about the capacity of the town. Stormwater is huge right now in my town. So they're like, well, this is going to create stormwater. No, it's going to fix it because those projects will have to repair the bad stormwater management that we have. But they don't understand it. They think it's only creating more problems. So understanding the issues and the technical aspects of it that they're going to throw at you. But some people, some people will just hang up the phone on you. Like I had someone call me to tell me something, and I said, well, at the meeting, and just hung up on the phone. So I'm like, I'm not going to, not everyone likes peaches. Right? I mean, you're not going to change their minds. But you know what? He came back for something, and we actually compromised on something. And at the meeting, I said, there are different ways of approaching this, and you didn't approach it well, but we're going to work with you because that's what we do. We work with the community. But you're going to have people that are just so anxious and angry, and some you can convince and some you can't. But getting educated and understanding all the aspects of it and knowing where the holes are to say, there's going to be a study on that or whatever. That's how you're going to get people to feel more comfortable, I feel. So.
I'm just going to say one more thing, which is, the Needham, Wellesley, 75% of the communities in Massachusetts, our school populations are plummeting. They're really declining. You probably all live in the city, but if you happen to live in a smaller town and you look, it's real easy to look it up. Most of them are declining. They're closing schools. It's quite a, we need families out there, so.
MAPC did a great study on the relationship between housing production and school enrollment that I strongly recommend you check out. If you just Google MAPC school enrollment, it'll come up, and yeah, pretty much everywhere. It's other than like a few, the Arlingtons of the world where people are flocking there for the schools specifically, pretty much everywhere else it is.
My name's Kyle. I had a question about, speaking of things that people lose their mind about, parking. So there's not anything in the MBTA communities bill about parking, so that is left up to the communities. And I'm guessing that one of the chief things people are worried about is additional cars, more traffic, all those things. But it's encouraging transit-oriented development. So the point is that you're not adding a lot of cars, right? So I was just wondering if you could talk, talking points on that, and then also if I'm just understanding the situation correctly.
Yeah. So the guidelines themselves don't tell you what to do with the parking. Like the guidelines that HLC promulgated are not like no more than one spot per unit. But it is considered when they're looking at is this district compliant or not with the guidelines. That is a factor they have to consider, because if you're saying 5 parking spots per unit, that's obviously going to make development prohibitive. So how it breaks down in terms of how many spaces can you get away with and meet the requirements and still be compliant is really going to be community by community. But when people raise those concerns, my response is a few things. One, I agree we need to be discouraging car use in our communities, especially in places that have access to public transportation. And one of the ways that we can do that is by creating parking maximums, reducing the amount of parking that we require for each unit of housing that we build in town is a way to really discourage new residents from bringing cars into town. And if we're building this housing near transit, which is the whole point of the law, then that should be something that is feasible for those people. Additionally, residents, I forget the exact number, how this breaks down percentage-wise, but residents in multifamily housing are actually much less likely to own cars than residents of single-family housing, and they often own fewer cars. When it comes to the great car transition that we must undertake for our future, the reality is that there is this sticky transition point where we have to, if we keep encouraging car use by making more parking, people are just going to keep buying more cars. So we have to make it uncomfortable to own an unnecessary number of cars if we ever want people to stop driving everywhere. So.
Is that you can require more parking and your district will be that much bigger because cars take up space. I don't want parking. No, I know. But I'm saying you guys are uniquely gifted because most people just are not, they're not thinking land-wise. They're not thinking site planning-wise. They're just not doing the math. So they don't get it. Like if you require 2 stories, you can do that. This district is going to be 10,000 acres or, whatever. So it's a question of fitting the stuff on the site. And if you can get a good argument for that and give it to me, I'll be like, please. Yeah.
But yes, I assumed you were on the team, limit parking. For anyone on the live stream who couldn't hear that, one thing to consider is variances for parking. If you do lower the number, you might have to be prepared for those requests.
My question is kind of what happens next? You already said that this is going to go through some way or another in the next couple of years. So what happens next? Because you're dealing with the reality of outside developers purchasing land, trying to make a profit on these housing developments. Yes, sticking to a percentage of what's going to be affordable, but the reality is we're still living in this housing crisis that rent is so high. And the affordability in a lot of these towns, even for current renters, is extremely high. And kind of what's the next kind of coalition that needs to happen or advocacy to make it all affordable? Because it's great to provide housing, but it needs to be affordable for everybody to be in those towns.
Yeah, absolutely. So, zoning is really the first of so many steps we have to take. And it's critical. We kind of can't take any of those next steps if we don't take care of our zoning first. So I'm really glad that the legislature saw that. A few things. One, the Affordable Homes Act was passed by the state legislature this July. It is a landmark bond bill, $5.1 billion of new funding for programs like rental vouchers, down payment assistance, a variety of just giving cash directly to people to help address their housing concerns. It also included over 50 new policies that, cover so many areas of protecting tenants, establishing an Office of Fair Housing. So it's a really broad sweeping bill. It also legalized accessory dwelling units on every single family parcel in the state, which is super exciting. So there's a lot of stuff in there that is going to be implemented over the next couple of years, and we hope to be a part of that. And then we also have our Massachusetts coalition that we just recently launched, which is CHAPA's statewide coalition to get 200,000 homes by 2030. So I recommend that you go to our website and check out that coalition as well. And did you want to add anything?
Yeah, and I'll just say there we go. I want to say there's a lot of other ideas we have in the works for things we can do to keep addressing the housing shortage and housing affordability. One is that MBTA communities is really just a start on what we can do with zoning reform. Right now, if you want to build more affordable housing in most of the state, you simply cannot legally do that, whether it's subsidized or not. The zoning doesn't allow for it. And so we're thinking about, can we kind of extend this law statewide? And our initial thought when folks were thinking about the MBTA Communities Act was to have it apply to every municipality in the Commonwealth. And so something broader and more statewide is still on the table, and with your help it becomes much more possible the more people that get involved in this movement. Second thing I wanted to say is that as architects, a lot about the barriers to building, especially buildings that might have smaller units, could be more naturally affordable. CHAPA really tries to act as a convener for folks across the affordable housing, development, real estate industry on bringing up concerns to the state level and turning them into policy. So if you have your own ideas, please tell us. We really want to hear them, and we really want to help advance all the pro-housing ideas we can. Yeah.
This will be the last question.
For the cities and towns that have already accepted the MBTA Communities Act, have you seen any new developments? And has there been a discussion in increasing the capacity of the transit infrastructure that gets to the city?
Great question. So yes, the first community that actually passed their district was Lexington. And they did it, in May of 2023. They were just like, let's do it. They had already been in a process for a long time. So they were well primed for it. And we are starting to see some projects in Lexington come out of this zoning specifically, which is very exciting. The other communities, other than those 12 rapid transit, pretty much all are either past their districts in the spring or are hopefully about to pass their districts in the fall. So I'm not aware of any projects that are moving through the pipeline in those communities, but I have heard from a lot of the planners that I work with that before they even passed their district, had developers reaching out to them to be like, where's your district going to be? Do you want to give me a heads up about where the district's going to be? So they are keeping an eye on this, absolutely. And then in terms of the investing in transit infrastructure, The MBTA also has this like new real estate department that I've started talking to. And I guess they've been consulting with developers, trying to kind of like get developers of transit-oriented projects to invest in some of the transit infrastructure. So like, hey, you want to build a giant apartment building right next to a train stop? Like, will you help update the train stop to like add better seating and lighting and bike parking? Like, trying to see what they can get out of developers in that way as well. And then hopefully the more folks who live near the train, the more they take it, and that, you know, increased ridership is that what we need in order to be able to advocate for increased funding.
Perfect. Thank you all so much for the Q&A. I think that was really, really helpful to get an understanding of what 3A is, where it was, and where it's going. And so we are going to shift into a roundtable discussion. And so for everyone online, thank you so much for joining us. We will be ending the live stream here. So huge thank you to our two cameras as well, to my wonderful